sometimes when you see an opinion piece, it's hard to not agree with someone so 100% completely. But when you read something like this, it sums up, first of all, the attitude of the Brexiteers. It shows that one of the longest things I've been saying for so long, that Brexit is not driven in reality. It's an ideological stance that people just abandon any sense and sensible reality given to facts, figures, everything we've been seeing recently. They've been bringing out, it's Project Fear, and yet, hold on guys, I'm actually reciting to you figures and stuff that experts have said, and not just any experts. Sometimes the head of the World Trade Organization is coming out and saying exactly the same thing. Not only that, but the source for many of the things you are saying that are Project Fear is coming directly from the government itself. So, this is from a guy called Raphael Bar. I have trouble pronouncing names if I've never heard them before, but I know it's Raphael Beher, spelt B-E-H-R. So, it's called Brexiteers Have Lost Sight of the Greatest Free Trade Prize of All. One dubious perk of writing about politics is free books that no one else would choose to read. Often ambiguous, MPs feel that they ought to put their vision in print, regardless of whether or not they have one. Those unsolicited manifestos are then dispatched to newspaper offices, where they are mostly forgotten, mostly, but not entirely. I recently found myself browsing one such volume, Britannia Unchained, co-authored by 5 Conservative MPs in 2012, who immodestly described themselves as rising stars on the sleeve. One, Dominic Raab, has risen to be Secretary of State for Brexit, which is the reason enough to revisit his back catalogue. The premise for Britannia Unchained is that Britain, made torpid by a coddling state, faces decline unless it extinguishes tumultuous risk aversion for a spirit of buccaneering enterprise. This was not a new theme for the Conservatives in 2012. It had become a kind of mantra in the context of Brexit. Buccaneers apparently can't sail while still anchored to Brussels. Freedom means nothing if it isn't the freedom to sign trade deals, and EU membership, specifically adherence to the common external tariff as part of the customs union, therefore amounts to intolerable bondage. You might imagine that this view was anticipated by Raab and friends 4 years before the referendum. But no. Nowhere, not once, do the authors so much as hint that EU membership is a problem or that ending it forms part of the solution. There is stuff about the venture capitalism, maths training and welfare reform. On the cruelty of a customs union, not a word. So what? People change their mind, they adapt to circumstance. Who cares that the very recently self-styled intellectual vanguard of Toryism thought that the EU membership was wholly compatible with national renewal? Now they see things in their proper perspective. The greatest obstacle to prosperity was not a skills shortage or fiscal mismanagement. No, it was the common external tariff all along. And so we get to autumn 2018. The Prime Minister was due to set off today on a trip to sub-Saharan Africa with a trade delegation and a familiar pitch. As we prepare to leave the European Union, now is the time for the UK to deepen it and strengthen its global partnership, Theresa May said. This has become part of her stick. She goes somewhere that isn't in Europe and then declares that British commercial ambition soars beyond its continental neighbour. Liam Fox can usually be relied upon to chime in with the assertion that 90% of global growth in the coming decade will be outside the EU. This is a popular Brexit statistic because it implies that the UK has made the far-sighted choice, switching out of the 10% European slow lane, And that would be true if EU membership prohibited access to all other markets. If you could ship goods to either within the EU or outside it, but never both. Plainly, that is nonsense. Germany's biggest trading partner is China. Berlin does not see its regulatory obligations to the single market as a brake on global exports. All the other nonsensical Brexit ideas that have acquired credibility through sheer force of repetition by Tory MPs, perhaps the flimsiest is the false dichotomy of global trade and EU membership. The common external tariff prevents EU members from signing bilateral agreements, but the compensation is being party to deals that the Europeans negotiate as a bloc, and thanks to the sheer scale of the single market on terms benefiting an economic superpower, about 49% of Britain's trade is currently with the EU. Another 12% is with the 65 non-EU states that have free trade agreements with Brussels. The most recent, with Japan, was signed in July this year. There is no system for replicating those agreements after Brexit. Fox has racked up thousands of air miles crossing the Atlantic and the Pacific, enticing bland statements for goodwill from overseas counterparts, but the number of deals he has successfully negotiated is a flat zero. And that's where the reference to the World Trade Organization comes in. Won't that serve as a safety net? Perhaps, but only in specific metaphorical sense of catching circus performers when they fall. It is humiliating to land in one, a sign of failure, but preferable to severe injury or death. If the ambition is to sustain cross-border trade at anything like its current levels, or to provide an institutional framework in which the UK could replicate the clout it has as one of the EU's biggest members, WTO rules are a complete work of fiction. The WTO has become a rhetorical device disconnected from the organisation behind the initials. It serves a purpose fulfilled by the Commonwealth. The big thing innovating many countries that shared an ignorance in seasoned with glibness can be served up as an alternative to the EU. There was a Commonwealth summit in London in April, but from which the most memorable news was that May was apologising for the Home Office's cruel treatment of the British citizens of Caribbean origin. And that's obviously the Windrush scandal, which, by the way, still is ongoing. And if you're an EU national, I'd be incredibly worried about your future in Britain, who have been unjustly threatened with deportation, and no trade agreements were signed. When the Commonwealth is touted as an alternative to the single market, there is at least a degree of honesty in the audible pining for empire. There is a dismal pathos in Eurosceptic nostalgia for a time when global Britain was a territorial reality, not a branding exercise. There is no such excuse where the WTO is concerned. There are no misty-eyed historical or cultural associations, just cynical derision. No developed country trades purely on WTO rules. The idea that Britain should be the first to give this a go has gained currency in the Conservative Party from sheer embarrassment. It is not a model for post-Brexit trade. It is a euphemism for failure to understand the true value of EU membership. It conveys a deep unwillingness to admit any kind of dependency on our European neighbours, even the mutually beneficial dependency of the single market, the largest, most sophisticated free trade zone in the world, conceived and driven in large part as a British incentive by conservative governments. This is a sad island where a generation of Tories find themselves intellectually discarded and marooned. They wanted to unchain Britannia, and they end up uncoupled from their own history, unmoored from basic geography, and adrift from economic reality. And that's where we are at the moment. And I've brought this up before about Dominic Raab's book, Brexit Unchained. And we discussed this before. There is no economic reason for Britain to leave the EU. every single economist agrees we will be worse off, and that there is no way we can replicate the stuff that we do in the EU outside it. It's just impossible. We do not have the kind of clout. And as we said here, we have, the single market championed for years and decades by conservative governments, and building upon it and improving it. And now you have literally, as Ken Clarke puts it, for the past 40 years, a main point in the Conservative manifesto and conservative beliefs basically just being abandoned through sheer, as it said here, through sheer embarrassment and an abject reality of complete failure and pushed by a core of Eurosceptics that have no idea what they're talking about. That's where we are at the moment in current terms of politics. And it's funny when you hear people say, particularly like Jacob Rees-Mogg, that Labour's finding that people who joined for like the single issue, the whole basically dogging on momentum, basically, that they were idiots, and that these single issue people are a problem in their party. Yet who is the biggest problem in the Conservative Party at the moment? It's Jacob Rees-Mogg and in his European Research Group, which are dogmatic on the idea that it's a good idea to leave the European Union, when Jacob Rees-Mogg has presented no viable alternative, no ideas of what to do after, like what policies could we implement to make our transition smoother, or what policies do we need to do, or do we need to invest? No, he doesn't actually want to invest in the UK. He wants to be able to invest the UK to invest in other countries. And this is an absolute disgusting situation we find ourselves in. But we'll get on to another reason which has come out recently about why the people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage are pushing for such a speedy departure from the European Union.